Bonjour à tous. Good morning to all of you. The title of my presentation in the program is in French. But even though I originally come from Belgium, I must admit that my French isn't that good. So I think it will be much better for your ears that I give my presentation in English so that I can make myself understood in the best way possible. Because I think at this time especially, it is incredibly important to share ideas and to listen to each other's stories, no matter the language. Only so can we hope to overcome the intellectual and ideological narrow-mindedness and lethal hate toward others we saw at work a few days ago in Brussels, half a year ago here in Paris, and in so many other places in the world. I would also like to thank Françoise Mardru for her persistence in asking me to come here again and again and again. You see, I started my work as head of a brand new department in the Rijksmuseum only a few weeks ago. And I felt very strongly that it was too soon to talk about such sensitive things like a full-blown reorganization, like I was asked to perform, and right in the middle of the process. But after some consideration, I decided to participate after all, because I think it's important to learn from each other about the processes of institutional change, especially when it deals with information and knowledge creation. Because if we as information professionals can't be open and share, then why should others? I was asked to talk to you about the place of the library within the Rijksmuseum, but I will broaden the topic a bit by telling you about the plans for the new department, of which the Rijksmuseum Research Library is only one of the departments involved. But first, let me give you a bit of history and context, but very short. This almost poetic image of a fairy castle is the National Museum of Art and History in Amsterdam. It's a really beautiful 19th century building, but it houses a spectacular collection of 800 years of Dutch art and history. The collection isn't as large as what we see in the Louvre or in the V&A, but is a very concise and very rich collection, very focused, of about 1,200,000 objects, but with a very spectacular print collection, which is one of the best in the world. The artworks on display, it's very large. We have 80 different galleries, and one of the things that is what made us, what took a lot of time is that we had a renovation which took much more time than originally anticipated. And that was one of the reasons why the online collection was one of the things where we could focus on for the last 10 to 15 years. We have a large part of our collection that's already digital available, and we really developed a very strong opinion and attitude towards digital conservation and digital availability of records and of images, of which I'm going to tell you more about. They are accessible via APIs and as linked open data just a few months ago. The building itself is a very large, very unusual 19th century building in Amsterdam. It's a neo-Gothic, very atypical building in the Netherlands, where neo-Gothic styles weren't really in fashion. The same architect built also the Central Station in Amsterdam, which looks very similar, I must admit. But when in 2003 the renovation started, and it was meant as a kind of gift to the people from the Netherlands to have it finished, the whole renovation, in 5 years, that absolutely proved way too soon, because asbestos was found, and renovations are always much more complex than people think. So it didn't took us 5 years, it took 10 years and a lot more money than originally anticipated, which basically meant that for the last 10 years there was a relocation needed for research staff, library, and the documentation, which is a very interesting situation, which caused a lot of the reorganizations and institutional change afterwards. One of the reasons was that the whole collection needed to go to a temporary location. This very regular street in Amsterdam housed the most spectacular collection of the Rijksmuseum for about 10 years. I think neighbors weren't really aware of what was happening over there. This is a ground plan, or where you can see on the zero, the one down below was a temporary location, and upstairs there, totally up front, are the whole collections of the Rijksmuseum as they are now, which is a whole complex of different sites around the museum. The opening was very spectacular, but what I always think it's on fire, but it's orange is a very, yeah, the national color of the Netherlands, so it's meant to look festive. But basically what happened is that in the whole renovation, the whole idea of the way the museum worked as a building and as an organization was rethought, where there were a lot of public discussions. Among one of the most notorious was a discussion about the public passageway right through the museum, which stirred a lot of interesting discussions about public participation in large-scale renovation projects in the Netherlands. It's a very typical Dutch discussion, and it was so symbolic that this discussion happened with the National Museum. Basically what happened was that the local residents in Amsterdam pleaded for this public passageway to be open even when the museum was renovated and afterwards, and they won. So right smack through the middle of the museum runs a public bicycle path. They rearranged and took out a lot of the storage space which was inside of the museum and built some large atriums, which really gave the museum some light and space, but which also caused the problem that they needed to find storage space outside of the museum to house the collections. They rethought the setup and of all the collections. This is the Gallery of Honor, where all the famous 17th century highlights of the collections are housed. This used to be completely white in the 70s. So it was a completely rethinking of spaces. The 19th century gallery, very notorious, also a 20th century gallery, where the Rijksmuseum, which was before that, didn't took up this kind of collections, decided during the opening that they would invest in this kind of collections as well. They also built some new spaces, for example, an Asian pavilion just outside of the museum, a very large atelier building where the conservation department was housed just across the museum, and where a lot of material research in cooperation with the two universities in Amsterdam is being done. and basically it's the National Conservation Department for Art History in the Netherlands. This building is also new, and interesting enough, this used to be a much larger tower, even larger than the adjacent historic building of the Rijksmuseum, where originally there were the plans to house there a new research facility and a research center. But when the years progressed, the tower sank in the ground, and basically now it's just an entrance building. And this is the final location where the library, which Françoise already showed an hour ago, is housed, and where the library came back instead of this building. That was one of the discussions that took about 10 years to progress. What will we do with the library? This is the library inside. It's a very famous 19th century building and a library hall. I think there's another one, but it's much smaller in The Hague, which also has this kind of emblematic 19th century library feel to it. But it's such an impressive space that the museum and the discussions that went about mainly dealt with the idea of, this is such an impressive space, shouldn't we allow the public to enjoy this space? And how do we combine this whole enjoyment with researchers that really need to focus and study? And that's a tension that's and a discussion that's been going on for the last few years. The research library is very open. Originally it was even open 7 days a week, and it has a lot of visitors. And only 1/4, 1/5 of the whole collection is in the library hall, and most of it is underneath the museum square, where they decided to house the library collections near the sites instead of an outside storage space. The whole library hall was one of the places within the museum where they decided to bring back the original ideas of the architect Pierre Kuipers. It was meticulously restored. And the whole idea of an original 19th century research library was basically an impressive library hall as a storage space, a study room, and technical offices really nearby. This is the study room, which functions as the front office where people can consult the famous print room collection of the Rijksmuseum, which mainly houses a lot of the researchers and the fellows that the Rijksmuseum houses as well. It's adjacent to the library hall, and it is being managed as one large hall. The reading room adjacent to the print room functions as a reference center originally, where the idea of the museum was, in 2013, that it would function as a kind of information center. And in practice, it proved that that really was an idea that didn't work too well. The idea that you need a physical information center really doesn't align really well with the idea of a much more available digital collection at the moment. So it proved, it was set up, but it didn't really work as planned. So the museum decided to kind of gently refocus the whole project there. As a result, for example, the separate library entrance was closed, and the whole idea of a separate entity functioning within a museum was really done away with. One of the other results was that since it was an impressive location, you got a lot of visitors hindering researchers at the moment. There was a very noisy public mezzanine, and there still is, I must admit, on the second floor where people can look into the library. And it's quiet down a bit, but there is always a kind of balance that you need to strike against sharing this beautiful space and this very impressive space and showing the public how research was being done in the 19th century, combining it with the needs of the 21st century research. This I always find a very remarkable picture, and it illustrates, in my mind, very well the shift in focus, not only in research, but also in the attitude towards information and visual culture that there is. I like to think that all those girls are looking at the digital version of the picture that I see behind them. But yeah, I'm an optimist. But it also means that at the moment there is a very, at least for the last 10 years, there is a real shift in research output and methodologies. I come, before I worked at the Rijksmuseum, I came from the university in Ghent, where there was a lot of digital humanities research. This is a researcher who presented her, this is one of the fellows that work at the library. And in the print room, and she presented her final research last week during a lunch meeting that we held, that we keep in the Rijksmuseum, and she explained a beautiful project where she puzzled together a collection which is called the Panpoeticum Batavum, which is a collection of literary portraits of 17th century writers in a kind of cabinet that doesn't exist anymore. And she used 3D techniques to recreate a non-existing cabinet and explained very well how she went about doing that. So that's one of the things that, and afterwards she came to me and she asked, how can I store my data, which is very typical, of course. This whole idea of a shift in focus really aligns with the new vision and the mission of the museum, which Taco Dibbets, the director of collections of the Rijksmuseum, eloquently described, where basically the central idea is that the openness and the connection between the collection and the public really needs to be front and center of everything the museum does. Knowledge needs to be shared. As an information professional, that's one of the things that I really, really can recognize and can support. The whole line of evolution of what I really want to talk about is the fact that the whole renovation of the museum and the 10 years that it took for the whole collection to be offsite and hidden from the public almost completely really set in motion a whole different attitude towards the collection and toward the openness of the collection and the digitization of the collection. And it resulted after the reopening in several reorganizations. For example, in 2016 alone, there are 2 major reorganizations planned for the exhibition department of the Rijksmuseum and a new department where I have the good fortune of being responsible for, which is called research services. Basically, research services will be a new department which will house the Rijksmuseum Research Library, but also collection documentation, which about a decade ago used to be part of the curator's responsibilities, then became a separate department and now joins the Rijksmuseum, the library, as in one department, because we strongly believe that this joining of forces might make it possible to offer a much richer source for research. The interesting thing is that we're going to combine that with the knowledge that lies with the staff that run the applications and do the data management of the collections and of the library, and they're very notorious for having the whole discussion regarding open data and open data policies that really took up a few years ago. What is happening now, and that's one of the reasons why I was asked also to come, because this really needs more support, and I'm very interested in the project that Professor Sherman described, which is only the things that I can dream of because I'm completely new and beginning, but these are some of the partners that the Rijksmuseum is already working in. And one of the, I'll end with a nice news about a new project as well. These are some of the things that were already happening with the Department of Collection Documentation and Application Management, where one of the large digitization projects was digitizing the whole collection of the print room. It started in about 2007. It's still ongoing, and we hope to have the complete print room collection online by 2018, and actually that will also be the date and the aim for the whole collection of the Rijksmuseum to be online, in preferably high image resolutions, but initially just the images that are online, whether they're high resolution or not, but the aim is to offer the best quality possible. We have an open collection data strategy, which basically means that we offer the metadata and the images free online with a very open license. We started off with CC BY and evolved throughout the years, and with cooperation with Europeana, to a CC0 license, which basically means that all of the data can be used and reused. This came about because we very intensely work together with universities, and we still need to strengthen that relationship. One of the focuses, because we are in Amsterdam and the Vrije Universiteit, the VU, is very specialized in semantic web technology, is that we cooperated on those topics with an annotation manager software that we're building and releasing hopefully in this coming year, and really focusing our efforts more and more towards linked open data. This causes also new cooperations, which are somewhat unusual for some of the people in the museum. We work with Wikidata people from Wikimedia, which basically are people that are really rather militant and have a strong opinion about sharing data. So that are nice activities and hackathons that are happening in the library. We have one coming up this weekend where a lot of fashion data from our fashion collection will be annotated publicly, and where we invite people to come to the library and cooperate with us. And the last thing that is really new is that the museum signed some memories of understanding with the Getty and the Metropolitan Museum just a few days ago to jointly develop new data technologies, especially for conservation research, because that's one of the areas where, with the conservation department being in the museum, really creates exponentially a lot of very complex digital data that needs to be managed. So one of the things that I will be working on very strongly is supporting and setting up a more robust data infrastructure with research data management ideas, so that all the data that's being created by all those lovely people at Rijksmuseum will be accessible for the next generation as well. That's my talk.